Let's paint something happy.
This abstract flower bouquet is full of soothing pastels, summertime roses, daisies, and a Kate Spade inspired striped vase. Let's go.
For the first step of our painting, we're going to make the rough sketch using some red paint. So this is also considered the underpainting step of our painting. And I really like to do this because it really takes the stress away from getting those shapes and flowers on point at the beginning, and it really just breaks down those flowers into the simplest forms, which are circles. And the nice thing with the red color is that it's going to show through in the end, which is going to give a really beautiful vibrancy as well. So I'm just adding circles of different sizes. And then I'm gonna add the vase as well at the bottom. And the vase is super simple. It's just gonna be 2 straight lines down. And then we're just gonna add the foliage and the leaves. Now, if this step still makes you nervous, I'm gonna leave a free traceable for the stencil in the description below. Okay, and then we're gonna do some leaves over here. And it's good to try to go pretty fast in this step. You're not trying to be perfect here, you're just trying to get those simple shapes on your canvas, just to give a rough composition to work with. It's actually quite relaxing, this step, because there's no stress of getting everything perfect. Go. And you can also use, some artists use different colors for their underpainting. I like to use that red, as I said before, because some of it shows through in the end, and it just gives a really beautiful vibrancy. Okay, and then what I like to do is I like to mix a little bit of white into my red, and then I like to fill in my flowers with different variations of that red, different tonalities, just to give it a little bit extra dimension to each flower, because some flowers are going to be darker than others. And also it helps differentiate all the different flowers from one another, instead of it becoming one big blob of red. So I'm going in with some darker red, mixing some white up to make a slightly lighter red or pink, and then just filling in those shapes. So it's really easy peasy here. Okay, and then I'm also going to paint the vase as well. I'm going to do that slightly lighter because all of these leaves are dark red, so I'm going to give a little bit of contrast. Work my way around those leaves. Just like that. And the brush strokes don't have to be perfect. You can go in any direction. And I like to also hold my paintbrush higher up because I find that gives me a looser stroke and it's not as rigid. And this painting is all about looseness. Loose and flowy and stress-free vibes. So now that our underpainting is dry, we're gonna block in our flowers with some color. So on my palette, I have purple, orange, and pink, and I'm gonna leave the recipes for these colors in the description below. So what I like to do is I'm gonna pick up this purple. I'm gonna show you here that I don't like to cover all of that red. I kind of want some of that red still peeking through. So I like to kind of paint them in bullseyes. I know it looks weird here, but you gotta trust the process sometimes. And I promise you it's gonna turn out beautifully in the end. So I like to paint my colors in threes. So I'm going to use the same color on this flower right over here and make those funky bullseye designs. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. And I also like the combination of cool colors mixed or beside warm colors. So this purple is a cool color, and the red right beside it, it really makes both the colors pop. So that's a little trick in art, is when you want your colors to pop, just place cool colors beside warm colors. So now I'm going to pick up the orange, and I'm gonna paint orange on this flower over here. And you might not see the contrast as much because we're going warm on warm here. Red and orange are quite similar. So I'm just gonna do the best I can here. And I'm gonna do an orange right over here as well. Okay, and another orange here. So now I'm gonna clean off my brush and I'm gonna add in my pink flowers. So again, I'm holding my paintbrush right at the end or towards the middle just to help me give loose strokes. I wanna be nice and loose and flowy, not too controlled here. Okay. Oh, and we forgot a flower there. So that one, I think we're going to do with orange. Because some of these flowers in the next step, I'm going to paint with orange or a little bit of yellow. So I want a little bit of orange to play with right over here. While we wait for our flowers to dry, we're going to move down to the vase. So the vase, we're going to have it with a nice black and white stripe. So I have a little bit of black and white on my palette, and we're going to start out with the white because that way we don't have to wait for our paint to dry. So I'm just going to create a nice stripe at the bottom, and here it doesn't have to be perfect, and actually it can go outside the vase too because we haven't painted in our background yet. So that's gonna be our saving grace here. So just have fun and just add a nice big stripe. And then we're gonna add another stripe. And then we're gonna come back after our white stripes and paint in the black ones. Because if our white and black mix, it's gonna create that gray. So I like to do all my whites first and then go in with my black. And here they don't have to be completely straight lines. They can be wonky. Again, we're trying to keep it nice and light and stress-free here. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to clean off my brush and I'm gonna pick up some black. And then I'm just gonna fill in between. Now, when I was doing the practice run for this painting, I did the black first, and I found that that kind of created a little bit of muddiness and murkiness when I painted the white afterwards. So that's why I like to do the white first and then the black after. Just like that. And it can kind of overlap over some of the leaves if you'd like to. That's why we're doing the vase also in this step, because then it's gonna give us the illusion that the vase is sitting behind the leaves, which is what we want. In a painting, you kind of paint in the order of furthest away from the eye towards the eye. So the vase is further away from our eye than the leaves, so we're gonna paint that first. And that way the leaves can layer over top. I also want to quickly mention that this vase design is inspired by the late Kate Spade. I really admire her work, so this is an homage to Kate Spade. Alrighty, now we're gonna move on to the leaves. Now for the leaves, I like to work with 3 or 4 different varieties of green. So we're gonna create them together because they're really easy to make. And we're not actually gonna be using green as a starter. We're going to be using blue and yellow. So I'm gonna add double the amount of yellow and a very little amount of blue, because blue can become very overpowering very fast. So there is one green right there. It's a really nice one. And then I like to create a neutral green by mixing the same recipe. So 2 parts yellow to 1 part blue. And then to neutralize this color, we're gonna add its complementary of green, which is red. And once you add a little bit of complementary color to your mix, it neutralizes it. It makes it really like nice and earthy. And then as my third color, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab a little bit of blue, double the amount of yellow, and then I'm going to add a little bit of turquoise, because we're going to have a little bit of turquoise in our background in a later step. So I like to incorporate colors, repeating colors throughout the composition. So that's more of a cooler green. And as I mentioned before, when you're pairing cools and warms, they just bring each other out beautifully. So that's always a good idea. And then as my last one, I want it to be a little bit more yellow, lighter and yellow. So I'm gonna add in 3 parts yellow and 1 part blue to make it really nice and yellow, kind of like a lime. So there we go. We have 4 different greens to play with in our foliage. So I'm just using my round brush here, and I'm gonna start with this green over here, and I'm just gonna block in my leaves. I'm not gonna paint each one fully with each color. I want all 4 colors to exist on all the leaves. So I'm going to just add dabs of it here and there. And having this underpainting in the first that we did in the first step really helps just being able to block in those colors here. And it takes the stress out. Okay, and then I'm going to move to the second color and add. And all this paint is still wet, and that's what we want because we want all the colors to kind of blend and then create even more variations of green. And that red in the underpainting below is also really helping bring out that green as well. Okay, and then we're going to take our lightest green, and that's going to give us a really beautiful contrast against the darker greens that we created. And then I'm going to show you a little trick after we're done these leaves. You can also add white to your greens too to give it a little bit more pop if you're finding your colors a little bit too dark. Also, I forgot to mention that we want to fill in with green as well between the flowers because we don't want our flowers to look like they're right beside each other. We want to look like they're layered and not just kind of floating in space. So this is going to give us a nice fill in the end. And because we haven't fully painted our flowers yet, it's okay for that green to kind of overlap over the flowers. It's going to look a little messy here. This is like the ugly stage of a painting, but here you just have to like trust the process. Every painting has this kind of stage where things look a little mucky and odd, but just like in life, odd things are cool. All right, so now I'm gonna show you that trick I was talking about earlier. And all it is just adding a little bit of purple into our leaves. Just a stroke or two into each one. And what I find this does, it gives a little bit of extra dimension because that purple is really nice and dark and it's gonna give us a little bit of shadow. So just a tiny little stroke here and there is just enough for this effect to come to life. And you're not going to notice it so much in this step, but once we do our background, that's when you're going to really see the power of the purple. I'm going to add a couple maybe dots in here, foliage. I want to quickly also mention that I on purpose and mindfully didn't cover all of the red on my foliage and leaves and twigs, because I wanted some of that red still poking through in the end, and that's just gonna add to give us that beautiful variation of color. All right, now that everything is nice and dry, we're going to be filling in our background. So for our background, I like to work with 2 different brushes, my wide brush and also my small round brush, just to make it easier to get around all the shapes. So in terms of color, we're gonna mix a really beautiful, I would call this kind of like a warm mint green. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up a little bit of yellow, and then we're gonna pick up a little bit of turquoise. So let's say half turquoise, half yellow, and then we're gonna mix it together. And if you want a little bit more turquoise, you can go ahead and add in a little bit more. And then when you're happy with that color, what we're gonna do is we're gonna lighten it up, because this is gonna dry even darker once it's nice and dry. That's one of the tricks with acrylics, is that the color you see when it's wet is not the color you get when it's dry. So you have to kind of adjust it for 1 or 2 different shades. So I like to make my colors slightly lighter, that way it dries darker. Okay, so I'm happy with that color. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna start blocking in my background. And as I was mentioning earlier, this is where we're going to kind of fix some of the shapes that we weren't so happy with. So for example, I made this leaf go all the way out to the edge and I'm not too happy with it, so I'm just going to cover it, just like that. So here in this step, we get to make our shapes just the way we like them. So I'm just going to block out all that main area with this bigger brush, and then I'm gonna use a smaller brush to get closer to all my shapes, just to make it easier. And here too, I had a little bit of black that went outside of my vase, but we fixed that right up by just painting over top. So I'm switching over to my small round brush, which just gives me a little bit more dexterity and control here. And what I've also been known to do is paint my background in twice. So sometimes my background will be a little bit too dark when it dries, and then I'll come back in a later step and add an even lighter one. So if you find like your background's a little bit too dark right now, that's okay. I'm gonna show you how to fix that up in the later steps. So if you want your leaves a little bit more pointed, you can go ahead and create pointed leaves here. And I'm also being mindful here to keep some of that red from the underpainting still, I don't want to cover all of that red up. Kind of like that look of having a little bit of red contrast against that green. So I'm gonna paint around those leaves here, shape them up. So as you can see here, this step completely transforms the painting. That's why it's the magical step. Okie dokie. So we're gonna wait for this to dry, and then we're going to work on our flowers in the next step. All right, now we're gonna bring some details to these flowers. So in terms of colors, I'm still using that purple, orange, and pink we used in the earlier step. And all I've done is lighten them with adding a little bit of white to each to make them more of a pastel hue. And the only difference here is I've added an additional color, which is yellow mixed with white. And again, I'm gonna leave all these mixes in the description below. So to start out with, I'm gonna add the center of these two flowers over here, because as you can see, they're going to have centers and then the petals around them. So to do that, we're going to create a brown. So without having a brown on hand, I'm gonna mix it with just a little bit of red and its complementary color, which is green. So you want equal amounts of red and green, and then you get a nice chocolatey brown. So now I'm just gonna create just a little bloop, a little circle in the center of this guy here and this one over here. And that's just gonna give us some depth and dimension to work with. Okay, so now for the petals of the flowers, I like to start on the flower that is further back in the bouquet, which is this one over here. So for this one, I'm gonna paint it purple. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of purple on my small round brush over here, and I'm gonna show you a really easy way to paint these petals nice and loose. So we're gonna start in the center, and we're just gonna create these swooshes. One going this way, one going that way, and they're kind of small in the center. And then as you work on the next layer, they're gonna get a little bit longer, a little bit bigger, kind of following the spiral of a rose. If you can visualize a rose top down, then we're just gonna be kind of making these brush strokes with that spiral in mind. So it's nice and tight in the middle, and then it's a looser petal as you work your way outwards. Like that. And also mindfully here, I'm not trying to cover all of that red and that dark purple below. I want that to show through. And then for the final layer, I'm gonna make them nice and long and kind of curved out. Just like that. And they're slightly overlapping too. So as you can see here, these two petals in this row, and then you can see the petal on this row is kind of coming in the middle between these two. So they're kind of overlapping like a brick pattern. So now I'm gonna switch over to the orange, and we're gonna paint in this guy here because he's hiding behind these two big ones. So I'm gonna take my orange, my light orange paint, and do the same thing. And keep it nice and tight petals in the middle. And then I'm gonna get a little bit bigger swoops, looser petals as we work our way outwards. This is a super easy way to paint abstract flowers. Once you get the hang of it, it gets really nice and relaxing too. And now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to that pink, and I'm gonna paint in this guy over here because he's sitting behind this flower. So I'm gonna pick up that pink, nice and tight in the middle. And I'm gonna try not to cover all of our beautiful, beautiful layers of pink and reds. I like to also, when I'm making these bigger strokes, I like to add a little bit of downward pressure on the canvas with my brush, and that allows me to get a thicker stroke. And I'm gonna make it this one kind of angled, so it looks like the rose is kind of tilted on its side. Like that one too. A smaller one there. That's basically an abstract rose. The next one we're gonna do, we're gonna pick up some orange paint and we're gonna paint that guy right there. So this one is a half of it is off the canvas. So we're just gonna try to paint the center right about there. And I'm gonna come outside too of the border into the leaves, just to make this flower a little bit bigger. It's always nice to paint the leaves an earlier step. That way they look receded when you paint the flower over top. Alrighty, so now we're done the tightly bound flowers. So now I'm gonna show you how to make those petaled flowers right over here. So, alrighty, so I'm gonna grab that small round brush and I'm gonna dip it in this yellow paint mix. It's just a little bit of yellow with white. So you're gonna load it up, not too much. You don't want it gloopy. There we go. And then starting in the center of the flower, near the center of the flower, you're going to start your stroke off, and then you're gonna press down and sweep out, and then lift off at the end of the stroke. And that's gonna give you these like one stroke petals, just like that. And yellow can be a little bit translucent too, so we might need another coat. So again, I'm just pressing down towards the center, and then I'm pushing my brush down on the canvas and I'm pulling it out, and then I'm lifting my brush up and lifting it up. And you can also leave space between all the petals too, and then we can add another layer of petals to give it a slightly different look. It's up to you. If you like the single layered look, you can do that as well. It's nice to have some freedom in painting and do it the way you want. I'm just going to repeat that all the way around my flower. So now for this flower over here, we're going to repeat the same step, except for I'm going to use that orange paint. And you can also, to make it easier, you can flip your canvas upside down, just like that, to make it easier for your hand to get to all those petals. All right, so I'm gonna add another layer of petals here to this yellow guy. Just gonna add small ones in between, just to give it a little bit more shape. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same thing for this orange flower too. All right, so I'm adding that second layer on top of the orange and the yellow, and I just wanna quickly show you that I've darkened it slightly for the outer petals, and that's just going to make it look like these petals in the outer layer are sitting behind and below these top ones. So that's a nice little trick there. So all I've done to darken it is add in a little bit more yellow and red into my orange mix. For this guy over here, I'm gonna do the same thing. So to darken the yellow, you're just gonna pull in a little bit of orange into that yellow mix, and it's gonna create a darker yellow. Just enough to give it a little bit of a difference between that original yellow we added on. Alrighty, it's coming together. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add highlights onto our flowers. So to add highlights, I'm just gonna grab a little bit of white, and I'm not gonna add pure white because I feel like that's going to give a little bit too much contrast. So for each flower, I'm going to add in just that tiny bit of that color of that flower into my white. So this one, I'm going to be adding a little smidgen of that purple into my white to get like, it looks like a white, but it has a tiny bit of that purple in it, which gives us just enough contrast. And then we're just going to add some of that highlight color on some of those petals. It doesn't have to be all of them, just some of them here and there. And those highlight strokes are also going to be much thinner and smaller compared to the strokes in the last step, just like that. And that just gives us extra dimension there. And then I'm going to repeat that on all of these shape of flowers. The only difference is when I start working on the pink one and the orange one, I'm going to mix in some of that orange into my white and pink into my white to create that highlight color. Now for these petaled flowers, I'm going to create a really pale yellow by mixing white in with just a smidgen of yellow. And I'm going to create these really small brush strokes in between each of the petals. And I'm trying not to cover the entire petal. I still want that yellow to be kind of a border around this highlight. Like that, and just gives it an extra oomph. And I'm gonna do the same thing with this orange guy over here, except for I'm gonna mix a smidgen of that orange with the white to get a really pale orange. And we're gonna do the same thing. Just a small little petal inside that main one. And you want your flower to be completely dry before doing this step. Otherwise you won't get that contrasted look. Okay, and then we're gonna add a little bit more detail to the center of these flowers. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna pick up some white at the back of my paintbrush, and I'm just gonna dot some white dots down in the center of these flowers, just to give it an extra detail. All right, I just want to quickly mention some troubleshooting I did with this painting. So I found in these flowers here, there wasn't enough definition between each petal. So I just basically darkened the border. so between each petal. So this one I added orange around the border, and this one I added a little bit of red around each petal, just to give it a little bit more definition. And the other thing is I added slightly more of those secondary petals around this flower and this one as well. And the last thing I'm gonna do is, as I was mentioning before, I like to sometimes lighten my background even more in the final steps. So that's what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna sit back, relax, listen to some music, and just fill out this background. And if you're looking for another easy flower tutorial to follow, you can look at this lavender painting right over here.